Look for My Obituary by Elena Garro. The young woman ran down the street, indifferent to the rain and the night's emptiness. In her rush to escape, she forgot to shut the gates of her house. Her shoes pounded on the asphalt as if knocking on the rainy night. She turned the corner, slowed down, gazed at the treetops bending in the wind. She buttoned her raincoat and kept on going. She walked straight ahead as if she knew exactly where she was heading, though this really was not the case. She wasn't afraid. The streets, empty at this time of night, only offered graceful trees swaying in the rain and chrysanthemums that illuminated the shadows like tiny smothered suns. No one was around. She alone walked rapidly on the narrow, slippery sidewalks. She walked a long while, absorbed in herself, trying hard not to cry. It was better for her to look ahead at the rain saturating her face and hair. "He who loves the rain loves poetry," a Japanese gardener had once told her. She remembered her parted brows and her eyes painted to resemble swallow wings, and since it was absolutely forbidden, she decided to steal a huge bunch of chrysanthemums from the planters in the gardens. She was just about to steal them when she spied a man in short sleeves watching her from under a young oak tree. She realized he was just a few steps from her. She saw that he had dark, shiny eyes, Indian eyes, and knew that he would not accost her as soon as she went by. Her fear made her seemingly calm. She continued walking past the tree and glanced at the man in shirt sleeves who, in turn, refused to take his eyes off her. She had forgotten her desire to steal the chrysanthemums. She sensed that the minute she passed him, the man would start to follow her. She walked erect, aware of the street's emptiness and the futility of calling for help. The windows beyond the flower beds were all darkened. She had barely walked a few feet past him when she felt that the man had abandoned his hiding place and was now trailing her. She imagined him calm, walking with his hands in his pockets, following her with the sureness of someone who knows just when to catch up to her. She turned at the first corner, hoping to lose him, and picked up her pace. Her heart was beating so loudly that she could not hear which way the stranger was going. A few seconds later, the man's footsteps turned the corner. As soon as the young girl heard him, she picked up her speed. She heard the man walking faster as well. The street suddenly seemed full of hurried footsteps. The girl turned the following corner and began running, open-mouthed, feeling both the rain and the wind gagging her. Her running split the night like the rattle of a machine gun. Behind her, the man's strides pounded the asphalt. She didn't recognize the dark street she was on, full of towering streetlights set far apart, giving the shadows strange violet reflections. It was a long, slightly curving street. Low houses lined one side of it, and it seemed as if the other side was bounded by the edge of a small forest. All of a sudden, she knew she had entered the perfect place for a crime to be committed. A little farther, down the curve in the road and half hidden by treetops and the unevenness of the land, she saw rising, as in the story she had read as a child, the glowing windows of a small house behind a dark 19th century gate. She ran toward the lights, but it was momentarily stopped by a sudden deafening flash of lights and whistles. She saw the wooden barriers of a railroad crossing going down. She reached the barriers and, without a moment's hesitation, crossed the tracks before the train arrived and threw herself against the house gates. "Help! Help! Please open up! Please!" she shouted, gripping the thick black iron bars of the gate. The train appeared behind her, unaware that anything was wrong since it made its own commotion. The man in shirt sleeves was caught behind the tracks, the passing freight cars hiding him from view. But the train passed quickly, and the long row of red cars would soon come to an end. No one in the house responded to her cries for help. She turned around hopelessly and found herself beside a car waiting for the train to pass. She instantly let go of the house gates, came over to the car, opened the passenger door, and got in. The driver looked at her in surprise. "Help me!" the young girl screamed, clasping him around his neck. Shocked, Miguel tried to escape her embrace. What's wrong? The young man dropped her head into his shoulders and clung to his arm. He wants to kill me. Who does? The woman lifted her head and turned around to look at the train that just that minute disappeared. Beyond the train's last car, the silent street could be seen. That man! The young girl screamed, pointing to a spot on the other side of the tracks. No one stood at the spot she indicated. The man in shirt sleeves had disappeared and the winding, empty street was clear. Miguel stared at the emptiness stirred only by the rain and then glanced at the lit-up houses and finally at her, suspiciously. There's no one there, he said calmly. He's there hiding, waiting for me, she insisted. She was aware that the man didn't believe her. Go back home, he said quietly. I don't want to. Take me far away from here. He is going to come up and stab us in the back. Who? He asked, growing irritated. Him! Listen, sweetie, take it easy, Miguel answered, about to step out of his car. The young woman threw herself upon him and held him tightly. Please, let's drive off, she begged without letting go. Miguel looked at her skeptically. She was pretty with her long blonde hair soaked through by the rain. He noticed that she was wearing only a very short nightgown under her raincoat. He had the impression that she was either crazy or on drugs. Please, let's go, the young girl cried. Miguel obeyed and drove off. She immediately seemed more at ease and sat back in her seat without saying a word. Why did you run away? He asked in a conciliatory tone. He tried laying a hand on the young woman's bare knee. Upon seeing this bold gesture, the young woman sat further back in her seat and crossed her legs. Why did this stranger feel he had the right to touch her legs? She watched the rainy night attentively through the windshield and said nothing. Miguel looked into her eyes suspiciously and noticed her hostile attitude. What's this all about? Is she trying to get me mixed up in something shady? He asked himself. The lonely figure of a policeman walking his beat emerged from the depths of the night. I wonder if this policeman can help figure this out, Miguel said casually, watching her from the corner of his eyes. The young woman seemed more scared, but decided to keep quiet while Miguel drove the car toward the policeman. She lowered her eyes spitefully while he stopped the car. The officer approached courteously, glad to have someone to talk to during his solitary rounds. He, too, was frightened going around on his bicycle, waiting for some killer who might jump him from behind. Is something wrong, mister? He asked. Miguel looked at the officer's kind eyes and then sneaked a quick look at the girl who had lowered her head submissively. For a few seconds, he didn't know what to do next. His unexpected passenger seemed suddenly so defenseless. Well, we're a bit lost, he said, asking for the way to X Street. The officer threw himself into a detailed explanation that neither Miguel nor the young woman heard, but he kept right on talking, glad to have some company. Oh, thanks a lot. The policeman returned to his solitary rounds while they headed off as fast as they could. They drove in no set direction, in silence, each one lost in his own thoughts. You're a kind man, she said shyly. There's nothing kind about me. He drove the car toward Reforma Boulevard, circled around the Fuente de Petroleos, and continued toward the center of town. I can get out of here. This area is pretty well lit. Miguel looked at her with resentment. Now he didn't want the young girl to leave him. He pretended he hadn't heard her, but she insisted on getting out somewhere near the San Juan Latran market. Where can I drop you off? He asked, sure of himself. I really don't know. It's the first time I don't know where I want to go, she answered. Well, what about your house? He said harshly. The girl snapped her fingers, looked right at him, and said simple-mindedly, It's disappeared. Miguel stopped the car and stared at his passenger. He looked carefully at her bare legs, Her feet slipped into some old moccasins, and her hands rigorously crossed over her buttoned raincoat. She was determined not to listen to him, but put on a dignified but stubborn look. Her expression seemed closed off to any kind of discussion, and a few tufts of hair fell over her forehead. Something had happened while the young woman slept. Something had awakened her and made her flee. He tried to read her face for some kind of clue to her flight and her serious attitude. He decided to smile and ran a hand over her rain-soaked hair. "Some quarrel?" She shook her head and angrily wiped away the tears that ran down her face. "A death?" she answered angrily. "A death?" he asked in shock, holding her face so that she would have to look at him. "Yes, my own death," she answered without hesitating. The young woman's words terrified him. He didn't know what to say. He remained pensive and quiet. Had someone tried to kill her? "Does it seem strange to you?" she asked quite openly. "Well, no, but..." Why he was lying when he found not only the girl but the whole situation quite strange? Perhaps he lied to awaken the trust of his bizarre companion. He looked at her worriedly, and just to do something, he took out his handkerchief and wiped the damp streaks on her face left by the recent tears. "What am I supposed to do with you?" he asked in all honesty. "Let's go get a cup of coffee. I'm feeling chilled." Without thinking, she lifted her legs onto the seat and rested her head on Miguel's lap. "This way no one will see me, and I'll be able to see the passing treetops," she said calmly. "But I can't drive like that," he was about to say. Instead, he lowered his eyes to gaze upon the trusting face of the mysterious girl. He heard her say, "This way I'm not scared." Miguel gave in. An odd emotion had seized his heart, and he slowed down the car just to be able to look at her. "You look like someone who drowned." "Very beautiful," he whispered. She shut her eyes, then opened them again and looked up at him. "It's true, I'm not of this world. It just wasn't worth it to go on living," answered the young girl, watching the windshield battered by the rain. Small streams of water ran down the glass, forming a pattern of rapidly flowing canals racing dizzily. "You're also not of this world. Both of us are at the bottom of a river," she added as she raised her hand and caressed his on the steering wheel. The man said nothing. He decided not to look at her as she lay on his lap, with her eyes watching the rain and a world so different from his opening up between the burst of water that enveloped the car. "I didn't know that I would drown with someone as nice as you," she said, kissing her fingertips and then touching his as if transmitting the kiss to them.